Hello, this is a very quick film just to take you through the performance data aspects of the Planning Advisory Service benchmark. Okay, this is the how-to guide in front of you here on the screen that was sent to you recently. This is the overview page. It takes you through each of the steps that you need to complete before sending in the data to Planning Advisory Service. We will take your data, we will do some calculations with it, send it back to you in a spreadsheet which you will then use to populate your main workbook. Okay, this how-to guide includes a field guide. These are the fields that we want you to use to download data from your back office management systems. There's an explanation of what each of the fields mean. There's a sense check column. The sense checking is done between each step. Sense check your data, and it's essentially looking for blank fields, looking for duplicated data, range is missing, etc. So just making sure the data makes sense to you as it goes along. Okay, so first part and the main part of the data translation and the main reason for this film is to be able to get you to quickly translate your Q codes from your management systems into the R codes that we've created for the benchmark. Okay, it's quite a time-consuming exercise because there are probably a few hundred at least applications that will come out of your back office management system. So first of all, to create a translation of the Q codes to the R codes, I need to use two things. One is a pivot table and another is a formula called Vlookup. So first of all, I'm going to create a pivot table so that I can take all of my Q codes and put them into a place where I can do some quick calculations on them separately, but within the same spreadsheet. So first of all, I'm going to create a pivot table. So I put my cursor somewhere within the main body of the data, click Insert, Pivot Table, click on Pivot Table. As long as your cursor is somewhere in here, you'll get the range of data that you require. Click OK. It's the application code, the Q code that you're looking to isolate in the pivot table, so drag that into the far left column and then drag the same heading into the right hand column. That gives you each of the Q codes and how many you've got. You then want to create another column for R codes, so I'm going to call this R codes, and what I'm going to do is make a very quick translation between these Q codes into the R codes based on the definitions we have here. So looking up Q code 01, go to my definitions, and Q1 is an R010, so I'll put that next to Q1, so R010, Q7, let's have a look, Q7 is an R020, and so on. To do that for all of these Q codes is a fairly quick exercise, but for the sake of this film, I'm just going to populate all of these Q codes with some fictional codes by just dragging those down. But what you do is you take each of these Q codes and get the correct definition from the R codes over here. But for the sake of this exercise and time, I've just dragged those down. But I've got a full set of data now that I can work with. Okay, now I'm going to create or use a function called Vlookup that will enable me to quickly translate Q codes into R codes using the data in my pivot table. First of all, I need to create a new column, so insert column next to my Q codes, give it a heading, and I'm going to use a function called Vlookup. So in the formula box, if you put in equals Vlookup, you'll see Excel begins to recognize what you're doing, put in a bracket, and then it recognizes and tells you which fields it is that it wants you to populate to make the formula work. So the first part of the data it wants is the lookup value. The lookup value is the Q code. So click on the Q code and you see it's populated the field. Put in a comma. The next piece of information it wants is the table array, which is your pivot table, because that's where all of the information, including your R code that it's going to look for, is contained. So click onto your pivot table, highlight the 3 columns. You'll see it's put the formula up into your formula bar. clicking a comma, the next piece of information it needs is the column index number. That's column 1, that's column 2, that's column 3. So what we want in here is the R code column, so we want it to read column 3. Put in 3 and a comma. We want it to make a exact match, so we need to put in the word false here. So put in the word false, close the bracket, click return, and you'll see in my lookup formula it has populated the R code column with R021 for Q8. You'll see Q8 equals R021. Remember, I made these codes up, so they're not real, but you can see the formula has worked. So now the job is to create or to translate all of the other codes. Now you can do that really quickly. First of all, you need to anchor this formula because you only want it to read data in this field, these fields here. So in your Vlookup formula, you need to put a $sign here and here. That anchors the data. You can then drag this field all the way down, and you can see it populates your R codes, your Q codes, sorry, turns them into R codes. Q30 is an R034. Q30, R034. So you can see how that formula works. So very quickly you can populate all of your R codes. So once that's done, you are ready to start completing the rest of the exercise. So let's just go through. Step 2 is essentially what you've just done. So step 2 was to create your R code column and populate the R codes, which you've done. Okay. Once that's done, you need to start preparing the data to submit into Planning Advisory Service. So what we want you to do is step 3. This is basically you've taken out this column here, the Q column. We're not interested in that anymore. We just want your R codes. This set of data is then ready to be pasted, cut and pasted into our main template. Now this is very important because this template contains headings that our database back at Planning Advisory Service requires to be able to read the data properly. So please do not tamper with these headings. They are in the same order as everything else you've used before, but the naming will be slightly different. Okay, so they're in the same order, but the naming will be different. But we need to use a database that includes these names. So you take your data, paste it into this sheet E, and step 4 is just an indication of what that finally looks like. So this sheet E, once populated, comes into Planning Advisory Service, and what we'd also like you to send in is some guidance on your definitions for application status. So you'll all have called these something different in your management systems. So some guidance on what your translations are for your definitions for application status, for decision route, for decision issued, and decision recommended. So please send that in with your data. We will then create some information on Excel spreadsheets that you'll be able to cut and paste into your main workbook. The last job of the performance data is for sheet 5.3 in your main workbook, which is information on pre-app, PPAs, appeals and enforcement. These are not from your back office management systems, although some of the data might be derived from there. But these are this is information that you need to complete by hand, so I'd refer you back to your main workbook to see the information that we require there. Thank you. That is the end of this film.